Hi guys, I'm Dr. Tom Dawson, and I want us to talk a little bit about which vaccines are most important. While doctors will tell you that all vaccines are important, and that's true, not all illnesses are equally bad. Some illnesses are terrible and some not so bad at all, and likewise, the vaccines that protect us against the bad ones are more important than the ones that protect us against the mild ones. So for me, the easiest way to go about this is to divide them into three groups. The first group are those illnesses which will or might kill or maim your child. The second group are the illnesses that you kind of have a obligation to your neighbors to make the neighborhood a little bit safer place. And then the third and largest group are illnesses that I call convenience vaccines. These are illnesses that probably won't kill or maim you in this age and neighborhood, but they're things that it sure is nice not to have to have. So let's talk about the three groups. The first is those illnesses which may frequently kill or maim your child. The first one in that group is tetanus. Tetanus is a bacteria, and it's a germ that lives in the dirt in almost all of our backyards. And if it gets underneath your skin, it can produce a toxin which causes your muscles to spasm. And the illness used to be called lockjaw, and it is almost always fatal. I've only seen one case of tetanus. It was a healthy 26-year-old guy, and he was in a fine medical institution that took care of very sick people. And I was a young doctor at the time, and they sent me by to go meet him just so I could have seen a case of tetanus. And I met him, and over the next few days, he died. And as a young doctor who was also about 26 years old at the same time, that made an impression on me. As a doctor, you don't ever want to see an illness that you can't do anything about, but sit back and just watch them die. And it also made me go and check and make sure that my tetanus booster was up to date. He had the unfortunate of being an immigrant from a country where they didn't require tetanus, and that's how he acquired the illness. You may wonder why you don't see a lot of folks with tetanus if it's in all of our backyards, and that's because everybody you know has been vaccinated. And if we quit vaccinating, you'll start to see it again. The second illness in this group is HIV, which stands for Haemophilus influenza type B. Unfortunately, a bacteria that was named after a virus just to make it a little bit more confusion, but we frequently will refer to it as HIB or just HIV disease. This, when I was training, was the most common cause of serious bacterial infections. Things like meningitis, pneumonia, or a terrible illness called epiglottitis, where the covering over your windpipe would become infected and swell so that the children couldn't breathe. And sometimes it was swollen so bad that you couldn't even put a tube down to help them breathe. And we'd have to sometimes cut tracheotomies just in order for them to have a hole where they could get some air in. These were terrible things that we took care of. I worked in a hospital that saw more children than any other hospital in the country. And we would put a child in the ICU with one of these illnesses every week. And we lived in fear of some of the illnesses like epiglottitis. The last year of my residency, we started vaccinating for HIV, and it was a very successful vaccine and virtually eliminated this illness in this country so that almost no one's seen a case in the last 20 or 30 years. And so while you hear a lot of people saying bad things about vaccines, anyone who's lived through an illness like that looks at this vaccine as a miracle, and certainly I do. The next group would be pneumococcal pneumonia, which is a bacteria that was just behind HIV in terms of causing severe bacterial infections. And so when the vaccine for HIV was as successful as it was, then that made pneumococcal pneumonia or strep pneumonia, which is a different name for the same bacteria, that became the number one cause of severe infections in children. The vaccine came out a few years later, and it was not quite as successful as the HIV vaccine in terms of, instead of totally eliminating the illnesses, it probably reduced the number of severe infections by 85%. But still, that was a huge improvement and a wonderful step forward in terms of vaccination. So those are the three most important illnesses and vaccines, in my opinion. Even though I'm a pretty easygoing, laid-back type pediatrician who feels like there's a lot of ways to do things in medicine, I am extremely reluctant for any patient or parent to not give those vaccinations, and I will push very hard and almost to the point of excluding them from the practice. I haven't ever done that, but I don't push people on too many things. So if I push you really hard, it's pretty hard to deny me. But it's just not fair to you or your child or to me for me to not let you benefit from my experiences. My experiences are different from yours or your next door neighbors, but that's why people come to me, is so that they can benefit from those experiences. And having seen children killed and maimed with these illnesses, it was terrible at the time when there wasn't a vaccine. For those things to happen now would be unbearable. Okay, so now the second group of illnesses, which is not as melodramatic, these would be the illnesses that we owe our neighbors as a good neighbor to keep out of the neighborhood. And I think the best example for this group is the R in the MMR. That R stands for rubella, or otherwise known as the German measles. And it's a relatively mild illness for your child when they have it. The problem with this illness is if your neighbor catches it from them and she's pregnant, it can often cause congenital hearing problems. And before the rubella vaccine was around, it was the most common cause of hearing loss in children. And so while the illness isn't terrible, being able to prevent the most common cause of hearing problems and deafness is certainly a worthwhile neighborly project, and we owe it to our neighbors to keep it out of the neighborhood. The other kind of mean viruses that I would put in this group, that the regular measles is a really bad illness. If you don't see it much anymore, but if you've ever seen one with it, it's a child that is really sick for 5 days. The mumps, also not commonly seen anymore, but it's a pretty miserable swelling of your parotid glands, which is a pretty miserable illness there too. I would put polio in this group, a more severe illness, but because it is so rare now, I would put it in the second group. And then I would say that chickenpox is, here again, I've only had one child in the ICU with chickenpox. It's usually a milder illness. One of the greatest advantages of the vaccine is that if you get the vaccine and don't catch wild type chickenpox, you don't get shingles as an adult. And if you've ever known an adult with shingles, it's a pretty miserable illness that can last for many weeks. And then I think I would put hepatitis B in this group also. Some folks would object to that, since this is something that you primarily catch from IV drug users or from sexual contact. And while for most of my young patients, I advise that they avoid IV drug users and hookers, but nonetheless, this is an important viral illness that was becoming more and more common in this country, getting to the level where it become what's called endemic, which means it's so common that you can catch it without having to have that directive contact with folks that have it. And so we started vaccinating the children. The other benefit of that is that if a pregnant mother is an unknown carrier, it protects her baby from catching it from her that way. Probably the most positive thing I can say about the hepatitis B vaccine is that I have never even heard of a child that's ever had any kind of reaction or problem with that vaccine. So being able to diminish the hepatitis B in this country is certainly a worthwhile cause for the neighborhood, if you will. I think that I would put pertussis in this group also, the whooping cough. It's not a virus. It is a treatable bacterial pneumonia, but especially in young children, it causes a lot of problems. And so I think we owe it to the neighborhood to try to diminish the spread of pertussis and whooping cough. So that brings us to the last group, which is the largest group. I consider these illnesses convenience vaccines. That means that in a neighborhood that has good medical care and good water and hygiene, much like I would consider the practice where I live, these illnesses should not be fatal or damaging, but they're inconvenient. If you've ever had a child that's having vomiting and diarrhea at the same time, and you could prevent that, that's pretty convenient. So in this group, I would say we have rotavirus, the influenza, the flu vaccines, hepatitis A would probably fall in this group. And then as it becomes available for younger children, I think RSV will be in this group. RSV is an illness that's gotten a lot of press lately. and probably deserves a video of its own. And I'll get to that. I'll do that. Anyway, I think the take-home message for today is I've probably given over 100,000 vaccines in my practice, and to my knowledge, never had any kind of severe reaction to any of them. I have taken care of all of these illnesses, and can assure you that the vaccine is a lot better than any of these illnesses. So if you're interested and would like to know more, I have a video on why we should be vaccinated and one on how vaccines work. And so if you're interested, you might look at those. But otherwise, I hope this helps.